Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this online roundtable on restorative justice pedagogy. This event is jointly hosted by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and the Law Department of Maynooth University in Ireland. My name is Wendy O'Brien. I work at UNODC in Vienna on the Education for Justice initiative and also on violence against children. I come to this role at UNODC from academia and my substantive field of research is violence against children, child protection, children in the justice system. I'll speak further in a moment about how our session together fits within our work at UNODC, but before doing so, I want to briefly introduce the colleagues that are co-hosting this session with me. You will be aware, no doubt, that Dr. Ian Marder has played a key role in bringing us together. Dr. Ian Marder from the Law Department at Maynooth University. And my thanks to Ian for his initiative and his really hard work in reaching out to colleagues all over the world to enrich this conversation to the greatest extent. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. We are also fortunate today to be joined by my colleague, Ms. Jamie Lee, who leads on our work on restorative justice at UNODC. And Jamie will speak further about the work that we are doing on restorative justice in just a moment. So my thanks to Jamie as well for joining us. And my thanks to you. We are delighted that you have accepted our invitation to join us for this session. And I think that perhaps it is useful if I just provide a little bit of context to say that this is one of 3 cross-regional webinars that we are running during this particular time of the COVID lockdown to engage academics in discussions about the praxis of restorative justice in the classroom. You know, how does it work? How do we have this embedded within our curricula? What are the challenges? What's working well? What resources can we share? I think that this is a really nice way of enriching practice. So our session today brings together more than 20 academics from the Americas. And we have 2 additional roundtables on this. We had one earlier in the week for the Asia Pacific region, and we have one early next week for Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. And we've adopted this approach because this allows us to navigate the complexities of international time zones. And I think also that it allows us the intimate setting that we have at the moment where we can, really achieve that sharing circle and allow everyone to contribute meaningfully to a rich exchange. So with this, I think that, I personally am looking forward to a session that I know will be both rigorous and inspiring, and thank you very much for the part that you will play in that. But before we move to our discussion about restorative justice, could I just take a few moments to situate this within the frame of the work that we are doing at UNODC on the Education for Justice initiative? It may seem a little unusual to you that UNODC is working on higher education. Why is it that we're engaging with academics in these last years? So a little bit of background on that. So I will share with you the screen. To introduce the global program for the implementation of the Doha Declaration. So at the close of the 13th Crime Congress in 2015, the Doha Declaration was adopted. And this was a unique moment when the focus was on...
Sorry, Wendy, the screen isn't coming up on mine. Is it on others? No, I think you need to try the sharing again.
So thanks, because I was in full flight there, but prematurely. I wonder why today.
Do you wanna, oh, here we go. Yep, there we go.
I think we're in business now. Sorry, I may have been 1 click short. So the global program on the implementation of the Doha Declaration. This commenced with the adoption of the Doha Declaration in Qatar at the 13th Crime Congress in 2015. And the Doha Declaration is unique because it has brought to international attention the significance of the connections between crime prevention, quality education, and the Sustainable Development Agenda. So in a nutshell, that's what we are talking about. So in 2016, with sponsorship from the state of Qatar, UNODC embarked on an ambitious global program, this program that you see here, that has 4 pillars. The first pillar is education for justice, which is what I will talk about in slightly more detail. There are then 3 other pillars that are of interest to us, I'm sure, if we had more time, and you could find information about these on our website. We have a pillar on judicial integrity, which is a very collaborative approach to strengthening the capacity of judges around the world and bringing them together to focus on judicial integrity and independence. There is a pillar on youth crime prevention through sports, so led by a developmental crime prevention approach and looking very much at practical program implementation that's piloted and then rolled out in various parts of the world to strengthen communities and enrich protective factors against crime. And practical programs on prisoner rehabilitation in various parts of the world, including vocational programs. But if I can talk a little bit more about the Education for Justice initiative, which is unique for UNODC, and indeed it's unique as a global initiative. It's also ambitious because we work across the primary, secondary and tertiary levels of education to support educators in their capacity to teach on issues that will assist with crime prevention and the strengthening of the rule of law and the implementation of human rights-based approaches to the most pressing challenges that we face globally. So at the tertiary level, we have developed, because I work as an academic, I work across the tertiary level primarily, and we have 9 core areas. You can see those at the top. I in them all. They range from integrity and ethics through to crime prevention and criminal justice, which is where our work on restorative justice sits, trafficking in persons and people smuggling, firearms, counterterrorism. There really is a smorgasbord there of materials that academics can access. It's freely available on our website. These materials have been developed by academics that we have had working with us as consultants. And they are academic specialists in the specific topic areas. The materials have also been peer reviewed. And, you know, it's not so usual that curricula would be peer reviewed, but in this case, we've gone through a formal peer review process, much as we would say for a journal article. And this, I think, is sort of testament to the strength of the materials and their effectiveness. We have also put these materials to meetings where we have had interdisciplinary groups of scholars come, for example, to Vienna, or we will meet, you know, in West Africa, for example, to discuss the modules and talk about their practical use in the classroom, and not just their use in, you know, the global north, but also, you know, how is it that we can regionalize these for example, for Francophone academics in West Africa? Which are the case examples that we need to replace? How do we need to modify the terminology so that this is appropriate for delivery in these settings? So we've really gone to some length to ensure that these are relevant globally, but at the same time, they're not packages that need to be downloaded and used sort of in some sort of prescriptive sense. Rather, academics can engage with these and pick and choose elements of the modules that they would like to use in their practice. And there's no obligation for them to use other parts. And also academics can, of course, and I'm sure that they would modify the content to fit, you know, the legal system, the case examples that arise in law, the media articles that they find that are going to resonate with students right there. So of course all of that work would be done beautifully by academics. So I've said that there are modules across the 9 thematic areas, that they are flexible. I've not really mentioned that they're multidisciplinary, but we went to some lengths to ensure that we had a multidisciplinary team of academic consultants working on these. And this is partly because we recognise that the complex problems that we are faced by in the criminal justice system and in terms of human rights abuses and so on, these are not problems that can be dealt with by one sector alone or by one discipline alone, and that, you know, flexible interdisciplinary approaches are really required, and coordinated holistic approaches are required. But also we are hoping that they will be picked up in a multidisciplinary way as well. So if we think about restorative justice, it's perhaps a field that is more likely to be taught in criminology or perhaps in law. But are there any reasons why? And I'm very much looking forward to you contradicting me and telling me about the creative courses in which you have embedded restorative justice education. But with this module series, what we're thinking is that, is there any reason why restorative practice can't inform other disciplines as well? You know, could this not be part, you know, could medical professionals not benefit, for example, from understanding, on the one hand, both restorative practices, but also understanding child-sensitive interviewing, which is something that we touch on in the Justice for Children module, for example. So this interdisciplinary reach is something that we see as being potentially powerful. You can see there, and I will stop in just a moment, but you can see there that the structure of the modules is that they provide an overview of the issues. And this is really quite fulsome. And the reason that we have done this is that we are intending on providing, you know, a sort of a mini lesson for academics that might not be familiar with these issues, so that they can equip themselves with that knowledge, and then they can say, okay, good, and now I've got some exercises there that I could try. There's suggestions about how the class time could be used, suggestions about reading, which of course could be swapped to suit better the local context, some suggestions about assessment, and then we've linked in some videos and additional materials. And indeed, it's our intention to link into the modules the webinar that we are taking part in now, because this is, you know, a conversation that will enrich the understandings of academics that pick up our module on restorative justice. So in closing, I mean, you know, this is a really quick snapshot of what it is that we are doing with Education for Justice. But I think that perhaps I will put in an email some suggestions and invitations about how it is that we might stay in touch and opportunities for collaboration. So it might be best that I share those opportunities there, but essentially, you know, there is a network that we can join, and there are other ways that we can collaborate. But thank you very much. I look forward very much to the rich discussion that I expect will ensue very shortly. And perhaps without further delay, I'll give the floor to my colleague Jamie, who will speak further about the work that we're doing at UNODC on restorative justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, for giving me a chance to speak about our work on restorative justice, and also to Ian for organizing this excellent series of webinars on promoting restorative justice education. My name is Jamie Lee. I don't think I've had the pleasure of meeting most of you. I am a crime prevention and criminal justice officer in justice section of UNODC, where we assist member states in their criminal justice reform efforts. And I focus on promoting the use of restorative justice in criminal matters, and also on alternatives to imprisonment. So I will just take 5 minutes to share the news that the second edition of the UNODC Handbook on Restorative Justice Programs is now ready and will be launched next Friday, 22nd of May. As some of you may know, the first edition of the handbook was published in 2006, which is a long time ago. And as you know, the field has gone through a significant development and expansion in how it's used, and in scope, and just geographically as well. And in light of this, member states had gotten together and requested UNODC to update its practical guidance in restorative justice. And as part of that effort, we had gone through 2 rounds of expert consultations, and the draft updated version has been prepared on issues that have been identified by the experts. With some of you are here in the Zoom link, Zoom conference today. And the new handbook contains updated information on what was already there, with new national examples, but also contains several new areas that have emerged since then. It also takes a deeper look at the key concepts of restorative justice, which was said to now need a more nuanced and deeper understanding of them in the early 2000s, and also restorative justice responses to serious crime, which was not so common and well understood back then. And it also has a chapter on requirements for a successful restorative justice program, including how to promote safe and meaningful engagement of victims. It also has a segment on how to raise awareness and access to restorative justice programs, because it was understood that having programs available and having them accessible are 2 different things. So the handbook, the objective of the handbook, it's intended to be used as a go-to document for any policymaker, legislator, criminal justice practitioner, or anyone who wants to know more about restorative justice to refer to. But it also can be used as a training or reference tool for restorative justice practitioners, as it contains many different aspects of restorative justice programs. Currently, the handbook is available only in English, but we are looking and seeking ways to have them translated into as many languages as possible. Because in our experience, having the document available in as many languages is the key to having it widely used. So if you are, I'd like to just take the forum to say that if you're in a position to assist with the translation, with any of the resources that you may have, grad students maybe, please contact me and we can together think of ways to make that happen. Thank you again. I hope that you can join the launch event. The launch will be taking place over Zoom on next Friday at 2 p.m. Central European Time, which unfortunately is very, very early for most of you. So unless you're a very early riser, there will be a recording available as well afterwards. And for those of you who are interested in participating in the live one, the registration link will be available later this week. I will forward it to Ian, who can then share it with you. But for now, thank you very much. And I will leave the link to the handbook in the chat so that you can refer to it if you're interested. But thank you very much, and I look forward to the very lively debate that's to come. I'm sorry that I have to turn off my video because my bandwidth is extremely weak. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both Wendy and Jamie from UNODC for their introductions, and to Education for Justice for providing a platform for these important conversations we're going to have. I'm a criminologist whose main area of research and teaching are in restorative justice, so I'm very happy to be involved in this work. And you probably all know that there are many conversations ongoing about restorative justice research and restorative justice practice, but it seems that there are fewer conversations on its instruction in universities. And I know that some of the people present today have been centrally involved in what is now a burgeoning area of scholarship. And so it's great that that the E4 Justice Initiative includes restorative justice as a module, and that it's collaborating to enable higher education professionals from around the world to discuss the teaching of restorative justice and restorative practices in universities. The theme of today's roundtable is Teaching Restorative Justice Restoratively Towards a Restorative Pedagogy. So we'll generally focus on the use of restorative practices and the application of these principles in our RJ and RP courses, and also the role of experiential learning. And I'm delighted to have registrations from a variety of disciplines and jurisdictions, so I don't doubt we will have a great conversation today. The first conversation I think it makes sense to have relates to class climate. So when we teach about restorative justice and restorative practices to our university students, I'd like to ask the group, how important is it for us to build positive relationships with our students first? Would anyone like to raise a hand and speak first on that, on the dynamics of that, the importance of the positive relationships, maybe anything that you do in order to build those relationships in advance of or indeed during your teaching? Who would like to come in? I see Mara, Kevin, and Jennifer, so I'll ask Kevin to go first, please.
I'm fortunate. My name's Kevin Hood. I'm in Edmonton, Alberta at MacEwan University. I teach in an undergraduate program that prepares young people who are going to be working either as correctional officers, probation officers, those kinds of frontline experiences. And we teach in a cohort of 50 students per year. And so they take almost all of their courses together. So I think that is one of the benefits of a program like ours, is they do have the opportunity over a 2-year diploma program to spend almost all of their classes together. So I think in teaching a course like mine on restorative justice, I have the benefit that they have relationships with each other that are quite strong, as well as feel some safety in terms of being able to work towards having conversations that are probably more difficult conversations than you might experience in a normal university setting. I find that certainly my experience with students is the message I'm trying to get across to students with restorative justice is that very often they think it's a program. And so if they're in the field, that they just refer clients or offenders to a program, and that program will then somehow instill restorative justice on the client. And so a lot of my work with the students is to help them understand that I always say to them, if you can learn to live your own life more restoratively, then you'll be able to implement restorative justice in the field. And so a lot of the work that I do with students is to try and build on that. And so helping them think about and critically analyze what it is to be in a just society. I talk to them a lot about if they're in a relationship, what that means to be in a just relationship with their partner and their boyfriend or girlfriend. So really trying to help them move towards seeing their own experience of restorative justice and what that might look like. And I'll end there, but it's kind of my experience with our classrooms.
Ian, you're muted.
Jesus, sorry guys. Thank you, Kevin. And Jennifer, would you like to come in on that?
Sure. Thanks for that. My name is Jennifer Llewellyn, and I work at Dalhousie University at the law school there in Nova Scotia, Canada. And I am the director of a knowledge to action kind of lab, the restorative research, innovation, and education lab there. And one of the comments I was going to make, and I know we'll be spending a lot of time thinking about what do we do in the classrooms, but one of the things that's become very clearly important, as you notice, I homeschool now at home, so someone is grabbing resources. One of the things that's been really insightful for us, particularly through an experience we had at Dalhousie responding to a significant incident at the dental school, which I'm happy to provide the longer report about that restorative process. One of the insights that we gained from that when we were able to, in response to online harassment and significant culture and climate issues at the school, was to gain some significant insights from those students about what structures their experience and their capacity to learn together in the classroom. And so in terms of asking, you know, what matters in terms of building those relationships, there's really obvious structural things that I think are important for us to pay attention to in terms of the kind of competitive environment we set up, the way that we think about requirements and how students work together to meet those requirements in professional and non-professional schools. This was a dental school. I work in a law school, but it's also true, I think, for the way that we structure other programs. One of the outgrowths on our university campus out of that process has been different faculties. So from the medical faculty to the law faculty to architecture to undergrad programs, wanting to create spaces for both their students and their faculties to reflect on what is structuring our relationships and our learning communities and our ability to interact together. And what's shaping that, both at sort of system levels, but also at program levels. And so I think, you know, one of the most enduring insights was the students in dentistry saying, why is it that it took something awful like this to happen for us to be able to be with one another in this way, in supporting our professional learning and our ability to support one another in this environment in a healthy way? And that question has stuck with me, and I think it's a question that requires that we look at both the kind of structural ways we think about not only teaching, but the structure of curriculum and the structure of programs. And so happy to make that report available for anyone who wants to read a bit more about some of those insights and outcomes from that process.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I'll come to Mara and then to Brenda, and then I'll ask the next question.
Thank you. First off, thanks to all of you for organizing this call. And I can't tell you how delightful it is to see all of these faces on these call, new ones who I haven't met before and many who I've known for years and years. So thank you for that, Ian and everyone else. The question was a while ago, so I hope I've remembered it quickly. I jotted down some notes, but if I go off track, reel me back in. I've taught restorative justice at the graduate and the undergraduate level, as well as been involved in training for K-12 institutions and setting policy for K-12 institutions. So there's a lot in the question, very broadly speaking. I'm currently teaching a graduate RJ class, but some of the practices, some of the things that I do, number one, you can't simply teach restorative justice without actually being and doing restorative justice and practices. So some of it is very basic. Some of it is we don't sit facing each other's heads, we sit in a circle. We open the class in a circle, we close the class in a circle. We put tremendous attention on relationship building and community building in the classroom, which is different than from how students typically go to college, or K-12 institutions for that matter. For many students, that's quite a shock, and it takes a little bit to get used to what feels like a very vulnerable way to be in a classroom when you're actually sitting face to face with others. So that creates a very different dynamic in the classroom just from the physical dynamic of it. In that, it's building relationships, it's building communities. It also brings up certain obstacles, which I'm gonna, if there's a question to that later, well, I'll talk about it later, or else I'll bring it in now. Because some of those obstacles—
No, go for it now.
Okay. Some of those obstacles also come from that building relationships and collaboration. Some of the students are in cohorts that know each other very well. I had issues this semester with cohorts who knew each other very well and thus somewhat took it upon themselves to tell me how to run the class. So that gets a little challenging when you talk about a dynamic and a hierarchy in, as Jennifer was mentioning, a hierarchical institution where you're breaking the hierarchy in terms of how you teach this course. So there's a bit of a dance there in how you do that. And there's more to that than I can possibly go into here. So it may sound odd in just this small snippet. Another thing is I always teach in a hybrid environment. So we are partly face-to-face and we're partly online. What that means is that we do community building in both ways. Sometimes community building is easier when you're not face-to-face. And I've had students in these courses share very intimate things that might be uncomfortable to share face-to-face, but really develop remarkable dialogues online when there's a bit of a distance from those with whom they're sharing, which creates a kind of freedom in itself sometimes. Thirdly, there's a real balance in these courses between the theoretical and the practical. We can't simply teach about what this is. We have to actually make that leap from it just being an intellectual exercise to it being a very heartfelt exercise. And as any of us know who have been in this work for a long time and have done practice, this is not something you simply do in your head. And it's not simply something you just do. It's something you become. It's something that you are. So sometimes in a very limited amount of time, communicating that to students is an art. And you can see the students who are really understanding the essence of what restorative justice and restorative practices are, as opposed to having an intellectual, conceptual understanding of what this work is. And I would argue that those are two very different things. So communicating those in a college classroom, I think, is fundamental and intrinsic to actually communicating what this work and this practice and these theories are. I'll stop there so that others can jump in. Thank you.
Thanks, Mara. I'll just turn to Brenda then. You want to come in on that?
Thanks so much, Ian. Hello to everyone. I'm so excited to see you all. It just made my day, just tingling. My name's Brenda Morrison, and I am the director of the Center for Restorative Justice at Simon Fraser University. I've been there since 2006, and prior to my arrival, my late colleague, Liz Elliott, was already teaching restorative justice at Simon Fraser University and created a really amazing foundation course. And just before she passed, she created a book, Security with Care, that is really the course. So it has 12 chapters for the 12 weeks of the course. And so it's really a great foundation. We need to adapt it. I'm wondering the best way to adapt it now that there's so much more content out there in the field of restorative justice. But what's remarkable about the course is the pedagogy and the principles behind the course. So, and it's developed over the years as we learn and grow as a field. And so we try to make, even in the lectures, we try to make it as relational as possible. So we introduce the course by, by creating a different space, so the students go, oh, this isn't going to be the same as, the economics lecture I just came from. And so we do a relational exercise first up. And we do a lot of the things that are core to other practices of restorative justice. So instead of focusing on all the facts that go with restorative justice, we do a lot of storytelling, so they get an opportunity to tell their stories. And we bring in a lot of storytellers that talk about their transformational experience through restorative justice. We flip the classroom, so that changes the power dynamic. And so there's great videos on how you flip your classroom so that the students become the teachers, and I'm just there answering some questions, and the students love the flipped classroom experience. We do it twice. We also create reflection. We've created a series of reflection worksheets so they can take the content of restorative justice and apply it to their own life. And then they share their worksheets with their TA, but they also share it on our online platform. We also have an online platform called Canvas that creates another container to unpack the stories and their experience of the course, and that's a really great tool to unpack it. We're currently working on a workbook because the worksheets go with the book, so we're creating a book of these worksheets to go with the book. But really at the heart of the restorative justice course, the foundation course, is the tutorials that are based on the practice of circle, but also experiential exercises that largely come from the Alternatives to Violence program and other experiential exercises. And it really creates a wonderful container. And so we use that foundation course to teach 2 other advanced courses. We take the same course and we have it as our online certificate program that people can take. But I've also started to adapt it to other courses. So now I teach a first-year course that's designed to enhance people or first-year university students' connection with a professor, experiential exercises, and a lot of circle work. And we go back and forth between what I call desk learning and circle learning. And it's attracting the largest cohort of Indigenous students we've ever had. So half the students are Indigenous. So it's creating a new space within the institution to attract different type of learners. I'm happy to share all of this. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for that, Brenda. So just on a related topic around community building at the beginning of courses, I wonder also if there's anyone here, perhaps by show of hands, who takes the time to develop community guidelines at the beginning of their courses. I know that that's something that in the literature, okay, we got a few there, something that in the literature talks a lot about in terms of restorative practice and its different applications. So if I may turn to Shannon, Shannon Sliva, sorry, would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ian. It's Sliva.
Sliva, my apologies.
No worries. Yeah, as many others have described, we really think of restorative justice as a process in the classroom. So I am on faculty at the University of Denver in the Graduate School of Social Work. And I teach a restorative practices course that's actually called Restorative Approaches in Social Work. And so we cover the ways that restorative justice might be applied in all kinds of social work settings, from child welfare and end-of-life planning to criminal legal system to schools. And so we cover a range of topics. I also conduct research at the university. My work focuses mostly on restorative justice policymaking. And I maintain a database of statutes from the United States that bring restorative justice into law. But so yeah, in the classroom, we really approach the process of the classroom using restorative practices as Mara described. We sit in a circle.
I'm so sorry, Shannon, you're just breaking up there.
Start that be like an experience, the way services. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
I think it's okay now. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, if not, I'll turn my video off. So yeah, I model a lot of tools in the classroom for students to understand how using the tools of restorative practices experientially in their life creates a different kind of environment for sharing. So typically on the first class, we use that class to establish an ongoing circle process for all of us. And I take time to do an opening ceremony of some kind, to have students establish values for the class and guidelines. I learned circles from Kay Pranis, and so I draw on Kay's guidelines for setting up the circle, and I narrate for students what I'm doing to create the environment in the circle so that they can think about how to bring that into their own practices. We typically do a values round in which I provide a prompt for students to contribute the values that feel important to them, either generally in showing up as their best self or specifically in the classroom. And we talk about what those values mean to us. And then from those values, we collaboratively build a set of guidelines that we feel will bring those values into practice. And as we talk about what those guidelines will be for the classroom, we move from the general to the specific. So if people say treat one another with respect, we spend a moment talking about what does it look like when we treat each other with respect or not. So what would be behaviors that would violate our values or would be congruent with our values. And then we take a moment to agree on those values by consensus. So we refer to those values throughout the remainder of the class. I usually transcribe them onto a sticky note like a big sticky note now in the virtual space. We can put them in a shared document and bring those back to class each time as a launching point for us to address any concerns that come up around our shared values.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And just on the same subject of building community guidelines, but also I know that there's many of you, and this has already been discussed, that use the circle process in your classes. So I'll just turn to a couple of people who raised their hands there on the community guidelines, but I know also use circles. Potentially Rick, and then David might be able to come in on these questions. David Karp, sorry, that is, after Rick.
Okay, I'm muted in that. So I teach I did teach for 17 years in the Child and Youth Work program at George Brown College, the City College in Toronto. It has two different streams. One is a 3-year program, and the other one is an accelerated program for folks who have degrees in that. So one of the foundations of our program is that restorative practices is one of the 4 pillars. So everything is anchored around our 4 pillars and flows from that. So as a result of that, both our teaching and pedagogical practices and also student conduct all flows from a restorative ethos in that. We begin with setting community guidelines in first year. It's a letter of agreement towards building a restorative community amongst classes of 50. And it's something that is, read, gone over, operationalized in terms of what it looks like because it's value-based. And then it's signed by students, and then it's put in their file. It becomes a reference point if needed when there's conflict and issues. And it rolls out if there are, as I say, conduct issues and part of our restorative response when there are issues amongst students and that. It's also, we use the model for all seminars. They're all based on circles, very much like Kay Pranis's model. And then we moved it into our social innovation hub, and some of the students there who've done advanced training with me then became trainers of their peers, and then they led their own sort of team meetings, peer-led meetings, groups of about 25 using the circle processes. So those are some of the ways in which we integrated that into not only sort of content, but the way in which the classrooms were designed and rolled out.
Thanks, Rick. And David Karp?
Good to see all of you. Thanks for having me. I'm David Karp at the University of San Diego. Ian, I was just answering your question like you were taking a poll, so I wasn't planning to talk about this, but I'll just quickly say—
You're welcome to do so, though.
Yeah. I'll just quickly say that one of the things that we know about at least traditional college students is that their academic experience is only one small part of their overall college experience. In fact, maybe the least memorable part for many of them. And so the teaching restorative justice for me is very much entailed preparing students to facilitate circles, not just experience them in the classroom for community building, but facilitating circles outside the classroom in their own various communities, whether they're on athletic teams or in Greek life, or they're engaged in the community and facilitating circles in K-12 schools. And that for me, I think that the richest experience that they've had is in doing the work outside the classroom to whatever extent we're able to prepare them inside the classroom.
Thank you, David. And I think one of the things that underlines this whole conversation that I know Mikhail wanted to talk about was this question of power dynamics in the classroom. Mikhail, would you like to come in on that?
Sure, thanks, Ian. And hello, everybody. I want to talk about power in, I think, two specific categories. One, in terms of course structure. And so thinking about the principle of power sharing and the idea that we want to do our work with people and not to them. Imagining how we can organize a course that is congruent with that principle. And so thinking about 3 structural questions and potentially collaborating with students on deciding the answers to these questions, which are, what do we want to learn within the larger discipline of restorative justice, obviously. But what do we want to learn? What do we want to read? What do we want to watch? Like sort of like a version of how do we want to learn it? And then how do we want to evaluate learning? So these are all things that we would normally bring to our students completed in the syllabus. And the idea of co-creating that with students, I think, is a pretty radical, pretty unusual idea in the classroom, and one that most students are not prepared for. And I think a lot of them are quite excited about that prospect. But I've also had students, including graduate students, that have responded to that with, I don't know, like kind of outrage, you know, sort of like this is your job, why aren't you doing your job? It's not our job to do these things. And as soon as that response comes in, I mean, we can create dialogue about it, but ultimately I want to recognize that there are, you know, universities are really, really hierarchical places. And so there's a question of if students bring those complaints to my department head, how will my department head respond to, you know, I didn't come to class with a quote unquote prepared syllabus. So the dynamics of power sort of within the institution is one thing. And then the other place of how do we navigate power is specifically in the classroom. So apart from the structure of the course, how do we respond to sort of typical classroom things like students missing class, or students using technology even though there's an agreement that we won't do that, or how do we respond to students who disagree with each other during dialogue? Disagreement is fine, of course, but what do we do and how do we do it when the disagreement is experienced as really hurtful, right? And how do we respond to that restoratively? And again, I have ideas, but I'm here trying to identify some tension around power, you know, and to what degree do I use the structural power that I have as an instructor in the classroom to determine what happens and how do we do it, and to what degree do we work that out among each other. So I think I want to stop here. I really just wanted to identify a couple things, and I'm hoping that some of you will respond to them. I'll just say really quickly, since I asked this in the chat line, I teach at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. I teach in the psychology department. I teach a variety of different courses, including restorative justice, both undergraduate courses, currently about 50 students, and graduate applied courses in which the expectation is that students learn the facilitation skills and actually work in the community in some way to practice and apply those skills. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Michael. I'll allow Silvina Alonso want to come in on that, and then maybe one or two more interventions on power dynamics, and if people would like, and I'll move on to the next question. Silvina.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Silvina Alonso from Buenos Aires University. And here is with me my colleague Gabriel Fava. We are professor at the career of criminal law and criminology. The experience in Argentina is so different because we don't have an official program in the Buenos Aires University with restorative justice. But in the last time, we had some course of restorative justice, for example, with integral reparations, alternative section of prisons, justice and human rights for the students of the last year of the law career. The official program of law career in Argentina has a design that focuses in the litigations, but not in the collaboration law. And this is a crisis because we had a lot of inquisitorial procedure here, and the chat applied a lot of non-collaboration law, not alternative resolutions in criminal law. But from the Department of Criminology and Criminal Law during the four last year, we designed different activities with a final of taken visualizations for the students. And we had a lot of congress in these topics, and we make and work in 2 publications. One of them, Daniel Achuti participate with us with some works. And the last year for the postgraduate students in the official programs of alternative resolutions that we have in the university, we had experience of the circle restorative between colleagues, and was a good experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvina. Would anyone, particularly anyone who hasn't spoken yet, or maybe anyone who has, like to come in on this question of power dynamics before we move on? Yes, Joe?
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Chicago. I am a professor at Governor State University. I've been at the university for the last 6.5 years now. And for the last 6.5 years, I've adopted Liz Elliott's Security with Care as the foundational book to teach restorative justice. The way I teach and the way I proceed in class is usually by trying to establish this understanding that we are in a process of educating each other rather than me educating my students. I follow a lot of Paulo Freire's pedagogy, so that's where I come from with my students. So I invite my students to lead the discussions and organize the discussions for every class. And what I'm confronted with is a lot of what my friends Mara and Mikhail pointed, which is this sometimes awkward position of, yeah, I'm within the structure that is formally arranged and established, and I'm trying to create a more democratic, participatory, democratic space within that structure. How do you negotiate that? How do you establish a space through dialogue that allows students to understand the principles of relationships? What does it mean to strengthen relationships? Relationships beyond formal institutions. As Jennifer, I think, if I might be reading into what Jennifer was saying before, but how do you create substantive spaces based on values and relationships rather than these formalisms that we're so accustomed to? It becomes a challenge, but the good thing about that is sometimes when these issues are brought up, I stop everything and I say, okay, let's talk about this. You know, this is what happens. This is what you need to do. You're going to be graded. You have work to do, and there is some formalism here. But what does that say about the way we structure our educational system? And students really take the time to reflect on that, and I enjoy it. I just have a pleasure in having those discussions in the classroom. You know, if we're going to talk about relationships and restorative justice, strengthening those relationships, which I find is the basis for all of this, do we need to establish that it's not this imminent person-to-person relationship, but that we are all interconnected? And how do you bring the discussion of our relationship with the natural environment and, you know, different generations or future generations or past generations. And those discussions really are rich in the sense that they allow not only my students, I feel sometimes, to be really reflective, but myself. And, you know, giving also the social spaces and communities that I have to work with. And, you know, there's a lot to be learned from students in many ways. So I'm just very, you know, happy that these interactions occur in a thoughtful, meaningful way, rather than creating anything that doesn't allow students to feel that they can be responsible, you know, have some sort of collective responsibility in the creation and the development of the course. So yeah, that's my token. Thank you. Nice meeting all of you.
Thank you very much for that. And what I'd like to do at that point is just move on to asking some of you more directly about some of the work I know you're involved in. And so I'd like to start, if I may, with Janine Geske, who teaches trainee legal professionals restorative justice, and indeed wrote a paper on why it's important that lawyers should learn restorative justice while engaging in higher education. So Janine, could you tell us a little bit about why you think it's important for legal professionals to be trained in restorative thinking, really, is kind of what you're talking about, right?
Oh, thank you, Ian, and thank you for everybody for organizing this. This is just fascinating. I'm really enjoying it. First, I just want to say a couple words about my background, because it shapes how I taught and do teach the course. My background is one, I was a legal aid lawyer, but then I was a judge almost 20 years in circuit court in Milwaukee. So I handled homicides and sexual assaults as a judge. And then I was on the Wisconsin Supreme Court for a number of years and had a vocational crisis that's not where I wanted to spend my life. And I wanted to get back into the community. So I've been practicing as a facilitator in restorative justice for about 25 years. And in about 2003, I think, and I had a prison program and doing victim offender dialogues and crimes of severe violence. I went to talk to our dean and said, I really think we need a restorative justice course at the law school. So I made my case, as I later I wrote an article. And there are multiple objectives in that. Part of it was I wanted law students / future lawyers to understand what restorative justice is and what it isn't, and to be advocates of it. Two, I know that many of our law students, then lawyers, go on to be leaders in the community. They are district attorneys, they are judges, they are elected officials, and I wanted them to have that base knowledge of restorative justice. I thought it was important, if this movement was going to have success, we needed to have leaders who understood the processes. And the third was the amount of, the type of skills that many of you have been talking about, in terms of building relationships and dealing with conflict, and even hearing both sides of a conflict, and understanding that it's very complex. It's not as clear cut as the law is, that there's value in that listening and encouraging dialogue, and then giving people a safe place to have those conversations. So those are all goals of mine in teaching future lawyers to be able to use those skills. And I'm very happy to say that many of them come back and tell me how they use them in their various different professions. I want to talk just a little bit about the course and some of the issues that some of you have raised. When I first started teaching way back when, I had the traditional classroom. And I was doing that for a little while, and I thought, this is crazy, like as Mara said, to have them try to understand what circles are when they're sitting in a room staring at the backs of each other's heads, wasn't smart. So I put them in a room in a circle, and I made them close their laptops and take their phones and put them all away well, I felt like I had cut off their right arms. You know, they were nervous, they were upset, and I did a circle. And I remember one of my male students said, "This isn't engineering school anymore." You know, he said, "This is," but they loved it. And so I too, like many of you, conduct the course in a circle much of the time in different mechanisms. The other thing I did is I wanted people to be creative as future lawyers and how you can use restorative justice. So what I would do is their assignment for the final evaluation, they could write a paper if they wanted, and ultimately most of my students did not, or they could go out and do a restorative justice event or circle or work that they would either present to the class or even demonstrate for the class. And you know, I would help mentor them through the semester as they try to work this up. And we had some really interesting projects. I had one of my students work with a group of homeless people along with some people from a suburban church to talk about what it's like to have encounters with the police. I had another one deal with racial bias. We had police officers and students of color. Some of them did classroom things. One of them had all of us sit and talk about what the worst thing happened to us in 6th grade and how we felt about it. And then we did a restorative process with it. And so what they do by that is both learning to experience it and to understand it, but also to teach it to somebody else, because I want them to be advocates as they leave the class. And, you know, it's been so fulfilling for me to run into them out in the legal community and have them mention and talk about that and tell me how they've incorporated, whether they're prosecutors, defense lawyers, or in private practice.
Thank you very much for that, Janine. And I'll just turn to Tineke now, who wanted to come in on that. Tineke.
Hi. Hi all. I'm Tineke van Kamp. I am at California State University in Fresno, where we're also enjoying some really, really nice warm weather. Sorry for all of you who are not at the moment. So I just wanted to, because as Janine was talking about why she was teaching restorative justice in a law school, I have a similar kind of experience, not teaching in a law school, but in the criminology department, where when I came in 2016, there was no course on restorative justice. We are a very large department of criminology. We have about 1,800 students. A lot of them go into the law enforcement field. A lot of them go into corrections. So we are training a lot of people who are going into the field as law enforcement professionals, correctional officers, and whatnot. We also have what is quite unique about our department. We have a victimology option. So we also train students in it. They can get a full victimology option degree in our criminology department. So I was talking about restorative justice in all the different classes that I was teaching without having a special restorative justice class. So I was sneaking it into my victimology course, my comparative criminal justice course. As much as I could talk about it, I became known as the RJ person. And then I developed a topics course, which drew a handful of students. It was an elective, but it drew students from law enforcement, correctional officers, and whatnot. Most of them because they were in dire need of credits to finish their degree. But it was a great opportunity for me to, raise awareness about restorative justice and train advocates for restorative justice. We're not training mediators, but they take that restorative justice discourse with them as they enter the field. And I'm happy to say that it's now a permanent course. It's an elective that all our students can take, and it has been really fun teaching it. And one of the things that they find most valuable in that course is that I take them to a local prison, a local state prison in California, where I have them meet on a few occasions. We go 2-3 times to that same group of incarcerated individuals who meet on a weekly basis to talk about restorative justice, to teach themselves about consequences of victimization, to go through their own issues in a restorative way. So they teach about restorative justice, and I take my students to meet with those incarcerated individuals and have them sit in their circle. And my heart just burst with, with pride when I saw my students talk with these men and explain to them the theory of reintegrative shaming and how they were so proud of them. And so that was a very valuable experience. It's an optional exercise that we do, but and I've had students come back as well saying that now that they're in the law enforcement field and they've incorporated restorative justice in their daily practice, at home, in their work. So I'm very happy to carry that out with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Tineke. And just staying on the subject there of training practitioners and legal professionals, I'll come to Daniel Asciuti in Brazil, who I know is soon starting a new project to train people into practice in restorative approaches from a critical perspective. So Daniel, could you tell us a little bit about this approach and what it looks like, particularly the critical perspective you mentioned?
Sure, Ian. First of all, it's very nice to meet you again, besides in a virtual way. And it's the same, I have to say the same, that it's very nice to see Jamie, João, and my good friends Gabriel and Silvina again. And well, Ian, as we've talked before, we started really recently here a pilot project, in fact, which came from a discussion with our PhD candidates here at La Salle University, where I work. I work in the law school and I teach there both criminology and penal law. And these PhD candidates, we were in a seminar discussing the central role of the judiciary power here in Brazil in terms of leading the restorative justice initiatives. And some of them who are already practitioners on restorative justice were saying that their trainings inside the judiciary were not that much useful concerning the Brazilian peculiarities. And they were all concerned that most of our contemporary issues here in Brazil were not addressed, which was a kind of a problem for the mediators and the facilitators who was going to work in the restorative encounters or meetings. And they were also very concerned that Brazil, besides it's a big and continental country, has also very different cultures and backgrounds. So what we have here in the south, where I live and I work, it's very different from people in the north, which is very different from people in the northeast or in the southeast or in the Middle East. So we have these big cultural differences inside one country, and sometimes it looks like that we have just one training, as we were a very uniform country in many aspects, but we are not. And besides that, we face a big social inequality, which is unfortunately growing in the last years. And we have, of course, not only the coronavirus crisis nowadays, we have also a political crisis, a big one going on right now. And facing our urban questions from the contemporary Brazil, we have a kind of a considerable state and police violence problem, which is central to understand as well our situation on mass incarceration. So these trainings are missing such important points, and as well they are missing very important aspects of Brazil, which I would say includes also racism and machismo. So to train people in an appropriate way, our PhD candidates in the seminar I mentioned before was just complaining, well, why is it going on? Why every initiative which does not come from the judiciary becomes like marginalized being considered as unofficial, so in many terms here. And then the provocation of this meeting was, well, why don't you start something? You are very well prepared, you are trained to do that, you have more than 10 years of experience in practicing, and we have everybody here in the university who can contribute to this training, addressing not only the very important points of the techniques to be a good practitioner in restorative justice, but besides that, also all these other Brazilian issues, which are very important to understand not only our country, but also to understand what is behind the conflicts that arrives not only in the judiciary, but also in the community centers or community places like a university. In our university, we have kind of a clinical, legal clinical center where we offer judicial assistance for people who cannot pay for a private lawyer. And we have every day many cases of domestic violence, of small thefts, and many other cases like this. And we are then looking to address these issues in the trainings, to make people reflect on our country's very important issues, and to try to understand not only the small or the micro conflict that is knocking in our door, but also to understand the broad context of our country. And well, we know it's a very big challenge. We used to say that Brazil is not for beginners. I think João will perfectly understand me now, but we have to try. We have to try to build these different pilot projects, especially focusing on our very specific problems in Brazil. That's the main idea, Ian. And I'm open to discuss it later if anyone wants to do it.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And I'll just turn now to Stephanie Clark to tell us a little bit about their own Restorative Justice Center in a law department, if that's okay, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian, and hello to everyone. I first just want to express gratitude for being here and being able to see you and share conversation with you. Some of you I haven't met, some of you I'm looking forward to meeting. It's just great to be here. I actually am one of our partners. So I'm Stephanie Clark at the Vermont Law School, and I haven't met, been the director of the Center for Justice Reform, but we recently received a grant in partnership with the University of Vermont and also the University of San Diego. So David is one of our partners in this federal grant, also with the Department of Justice. And we're creating a National Center on Restorative Justice that actually probably has already absorbed the current Center for Justice Reform. And I'm now director of this National Center, and
We lost you there for a second, Stephanie.
I think, am I back now?
You are, but you're breaking up a little bit. Maybe just turn your camera off while you're speaking. Would that be okay? Just to save the bandwidth?
Absolutely. So can you still
hear
me now?
Yep, that's coming through clear. Thank you, Stephanie.
Terrific, yeah. So what I was saying is that while we are creating this National Center on Restorative Justice, I say it really lightly because we recognize that we are incredibly fledgling and we have some great partnerships and some wonderful initiatives. You know, it's been such a wonderful opportunity to start at a law school and building a Master of Arts in Restorative Justice and a professional certificate program, and to then just meet, you know, such wonderful people nationally and internationally that we've had the real pleasure to partner with. the work that we have going forward, it really involves a lot of educational opportunities, both in prisons, both in partnership with treatment courts, and also, of course, for practitioners, both legal practitioners and then also just other practitioners and people that are interested in what they can do in terms of bringing restorative justice or restorative principles to the work that they're already doing. It's so interesting because we are, you know, as I say, it's fledgling. And so we are really just very at the very beginning of this particular opportunity. But I know that I'm looking forward to the work ahead. And so many of already the comments, in particular, I've been following the chat fairly closely about, you know, how we really infuse restorative principles in what we do in our classes and in our curriculum is so critical. And at the same time, we also have to be building that within our systems and our sort of facilities. One of the things I put something in the chat, but I just wanted to comment on in terms of the hierarchical piece, which is, you know, one of the things that I strive to do with my students always is to recognize the agreements that we share for the reasons that we're together to be working in restorative, you know, classes, and to have opportunities when we bump into structure, have students recognize and explore what their responsibilities are in the context of that. And by having this sort of open conversation and lens about why we're there and what they're wanting and achieving from being in an educational program, often that by itself is enough. And I find that we usually come to this idea that, yeah, there is an agreement here and they have responsibilities, and students are excited to rise to that occasion. So anyway, that's sort of a lot and a little bit off track, but it was sort of what was in my mind at the moment. We're very excited about the work and looking forward to collaborating with as many people as we can. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. So we just have, for information, about 45 minutes left. I'd like to save about 25 for a closing circle, so everyone will get a chance to speak definitely. And in the intervening 20 minutes, I want to make sure that I come to Dorothy and Lindsay, who I'll come to next to talk about their own writings on restorative pedagogy. I would like also to make sure that I come to John Bailey to talk about the IARP's masters, and also in particular the online component, thinking about the online delivery, and then also to David Wexler to talk about the overlap with therapeutic jurisprudence and what we might learn from that. So if I may start this part by turning to Lindsay, whose new book I have here. Luckily, I purchased this to arrive at my home address after I was kicked out of my office by Corona. Yeah, I could see a couple of people have it there. I do have many of your other books. I just have them in the office, which I have not been able to access, or in Dorothy's case, it's in the mail on its way here right now. So Lindsay, if I may start with you and just ask you a little bit about kind of sort of the central thesis of the book. And in particular, you talk about games and activities. Can you tell us about the importance of games in your experience in teaching restorative practice?
Sure. And thanks so much, Ian, for bringing everyone together. I'm just loving soaking up this conversation and getting to learn from each of you. So the central question of the book is really, how can we teach restorative practices in a way that's in greater alignment with restorative values? And so all the things that have been discussed today in terms of how can we be cultivating relationships in how we teach, how can it be really truly experiential and learning through doing, and how can we have equal voice in the classroom, so kind of breaking down that teacher-student hierarchy. And we suggest games and activities as a really great way to do that, of course, in addition to holding circles and some of the role plays that are used. And games, they're a really great tool for that because it allows you as the instructor to show up more as a facilitator. And so you're setting up the experience and then kind of setting everyone free. And what people glean from the experience and the reflections that they share in debrief oftentimes, actually I'd say always, go beyond what I would have shared by myself as an instructor. And I should say that I work as an adjunct professor at Boise State, and I live in Denver. I'm based in Colorado, but I also work as a trainer. So a lot of my experience comes not only from kind of the academic setting, but also from more practical training activities. So just to give an example of how this works real quick, one of my favorite games to use is called Out of the Box, and it's a game that we use a lot for talking about this idea of how can the harm be repaired, and that kind of central question of what goes into repairing harm, what can that look like? What I've found over the years is that people, when they think about that idea of repairing harm, go to things like paying restitution or community service hours, or go to, apology letters maybe, but don't really see right off the bat kind of how creative that idea of how to repair harm can be. And, some of the most meaningful solutions that I've seen as a facilitator are ones that really draw on participants' strengths and are kind of out of the box. And so we have this out of the box idea that is, familiar, of thinking outside the box. And we have participants actually in a physical box together. And the game is trying to free themselves from the box by coming up with these creative strengths-based agreement ideas that are also smart and really specific, something that could be put on a contract in a restorative justice agreement. So something like that is great because people are laughing together, they're exchanging ideas, they're really naturally building relationships just because it's fun. It's also giving them a chance to experience what it's like to come up with creative ideas to repair harm based on a case and the individual needs of the people involved. And so they're having that really kind of real life experience of what restorative line of thinking is like, understanding impacts and needs in repair. And then it's also cultivating a really great sense of equal voice. So I can just kind of sit back as facilitator and help the process move along and ask some debrief questions, but then it's opening up for them to respond and to reflect on, what is that creative process like in a group of brainstorming together, and what is possible in terms of that reparation space. And so that just is one example of kind of how games and activities can open up another way to kind of live restorative values in the classroom. And I'll just mention, in addition to the book, we had a lot of games and activities that couldn't fit in the little book, and so we have a website as well, which is restorativeteachingtools.com. And I'll send that to Ian so that it can go out with the resources. But we're sending out a game of the month, so a new game every month. So you can sign up for that there if you're interested in continuing to receive new games and activities, or if you have some that you'd like to share with a kind of global network of people looking for each other's ideas. And during these months of kind of the COVID-19, we're doing all online games and activities. So the one that comes out tomorrow will be an online adaptation of two of our favorite games. So that's been kind of a fun challenge to try to put into Zoom some of these favorite games and activities that usually kind of rely on being physically present together. So yeah, would love to hear anything that anyone else would like to share through those avenues as well, because I think it's nice to have kind of a shared repository of some of those games and activities.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. And I'd say, in addition to your recent book, The Little Book of Restorative Teaching Tools, for those of us, for those people listening at home, well, I mean, we're all at home, for those people watching the recording subsequently, who may not know about them, there's also some very good books, including David Karp's Little Book of Restorative Justice for Colleges and Universities, the IIRP's Building Campus Community, and Dorothy Vandring's Restorative Justice in Education. So I'd like to turn to Dorothy now. And I'm sorry, I know you have some co-authors on that, but I can't remember who that is. So maybe you'll tell us. But I'd like to turn to Dorothy now, who, as I say, has written widely on restorative justice in education, using circle processes in the classroom, and restorative pedagogy. So maybe, Dorothy, you could build on what we've already heard by telling us a little bit about what restorative pedagogy means to you. And you're just on mute there, yeah.
Thanks a lot, Ian. And really, as everybody has said so far, it is such a privilege to be around this table with all of you. And it's been great to listen to the kinds of things that are concerning people and are also people are engaging with. And one of the things that I love is I'm convinced that restorative justice is a way of being. It's a philosophy. Because there's so many similarities, even though we live in different parts of the world and are teaching in different faculties and so on. I'm a professor at the Memorial University in Newfoundland and Labrador, which is the extreme east coast of North America. And there, my area, well, I was a primary elementary teacher for 20 years, then did my graduate work. And my focus was on the implementation and sustainability of restorative justice in schools. that set me on a course of really digging deep through a critical theory lens to actually think about power. And I really am appreciative, Mikhail, of your questions around power, because I think if there's anything that I feel like I notice in the field, even amongst restorative justice proponents, is the struggle with power, or the blindness to power. And especially when we sit around the table and each one of us in our own way comes from a place of privilege. And when we are instructors for courses, the thing that I feel most challenged by as a very privileged person is how to share my power, and how often I revert back to a default because it's easier to be powerful. And powerful in an oppressive way. And I really do need to credit my work being informed by Paulo Freire and Bell Hooks in particular. And I know a number of you, your work is informed by their work. And so, Ian, you asked the question, what does a restorative justice pedagogy look like? I teach a master's course in restorative justice for educators, and then I also teach undergraduate social studies courses around democratic citizenship and that type of thing. And whatever I teach, because restorative justice has become a way of being for me, it's infused in everything that I do. So you asked, from my perspective, what does a restorative justice pedagogy look like? Ultimately, I think a restorative justice pedagogy really questions every single aspect of what we make assumptions about in education. And and the takeaway from that is that in our assumptions and in our language, we privilege some and we marginalize others. And restorative justice pedagogy, I take so much from basically the circle process, an authentic circle process, where the facilitator of that circle truly becomes a part of the circle and creates spaces of listening and sharing, because it's in the hearing of the stories and the sharing, as we've heard, that the transformation happens. It's so difficult to teach about, but it's in it's in the sharing of the stories that the transformation happens. So very, very quickly, I wrote down kind of four key things about what does a restorative justice pedagogy look like. I draw on the key questions of critical theory that says a restorative justice pedagogy always asks who is benefiting and who is bearing the burden. And then I've translated that into some questions specifically where we understand that restorative justice is about first taking a look at what it is that I believe about what it means to be human, right? And I think personally that in much of our work, and in my own work, that's where I fall on my face so many times, is that as a very privileged person, I cannot control my default prejudices that kick in. And so the questions that I use, and thank you for referencing the little book, because ultimately, yeah, I've written a lot about it, but the key principles that Kathy Evans and I look at are described in this, and this is for K through 12 schools, but ultimately it's for education and it's for life in a lot of ways. And one of the key elements is creating just and equitable learning environments. So in order to do that, a restorative justice pedagogy, from my perspective, always asks the question, am I honoring, am I measuring, and what message are my participants, students receiving from me in terms of who are they as human beings? Then very quickly, somebody else asked that question about, well, what do we do about evaluation and assessment? And I think that's a clincher for education. If we are still if we are not making any effort to revise our assessments and evaluations and use the same practices as the traditional institutions, I would question what we're doing in restorative justice, because the standardized testing, the exam, that kind of thing actually just reinforces all the things that we don't want to reinforce in restorative justice. So it's a pedagogy that doesn't actually focus on outcomes, but it focuses on engagement. And I use a whole approach called assessment as gift. And I can share some materials around assessment as gift. And that for my students is transformative. It blows their mind because they want me to tell them if they are doing well. And I won't tell them if they're doing well. You know, so it's self-assessment, it's assessment as gift, and that's too much to go into. But then also it's a pedagogy of deep listening, where deep listening is where I, as the instructor, work to hear what the students are saying, knowing that I might need to change. I'm not looking at how they have to change. I'm looking at, first of all, how I need to change. Then it's a pedagogy that is a pedagogy of discomfort. I love teaching, but when I'm teaching restorative justice, I'm uncomfortable most of the time. And that's a good thing because I'm white, middle class. And you know what? I hear stories from my international students and students who are poor that just rock the inside of who I am. And if it's not a pedagogy of listening, I can't hear that. And then finally, I would say it's a pedagogy of now. It's not about learning about what am I going to do when I get out of here? And many of you have talked about that. It's about the experience now. It's about pedagogy is now. It's a pedagogy of now. It's probably too long, but thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dorothy. And certainly it'd be great if you could share your assessment information you have there. And I mean, this is something I had received a couple of emails about in advance of this. And I just kind of, I guess, ironically, considering what you were saying, it is both, you know, a fundamental thing that we just default to the mean on. And therefore, ironically, I was like, oh, we just can't even get into that today. You know, that's too much. But, you know, maybe that could be something that we could reconnect on all at a later date, because it's something really practical that we might be able to redesign how we do that together. But just to move on for the time being, I'd like to talk to John Bailey for a few minutes, if that's okay. And John, you know, I guess most people would know about the International Institute for Restorative Practices, of which you are the president, and about your master's in restorative practice. And I'd be, you know, you're very welcome to tell us a bit about that. And in particular, I wonder if you might reflect on the online component of that, because, you know, that's something that there was a trend in that direction anyway. And I mean, I'm sure for many of you, I've been teaching online recently and had to, you know, wing it a little bit. So it'd be good to think about some of the benefits, the challenges, and your experience of that with the IIRP.
Thanks, Ian. It's great to be here with everyone. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you know, the way we approach online learning, I mean, just that I think is common across any institution. One is online learning is not superior or lesser than in-person learning. They're simply different modalities. So I think everyone at IRP just approaches them as two related, but there's differences between them. They each have their own sort of strengths and weaknesses. I think probably the unique thing, some of the unique facets about what we've done at IIRP is, number one, almost all of the courses are online. We have a few courses that are blended, meaning they are combined with some seat hours and in-person training experiences. But most of the courses are actually online. So we have students who may not have really met one another face-to-face until graduation. You know, we do have an in-person graduation ceremony. So the question as we went about, you know, some of the questions as we went about trying to put a program like that together, you know, surrounded a lot of things that everyone already talked about. I mean, one is the really consistent things that we would do in any classroom, that you hold classroom in a circle. There's a version of that. There's many ways to do that online, at least using some of the same discussion habits and tools. There is norm setting, values discussions, the ability to challenge one another, the expectation that professors will be challenged as much or more so, like Dorothy was saying, than students. But we had a couple of other challenges. One was, I mean, when the program was expanding, it was interesting. Craig Adamson, our provost, and myself were in the same doctoral program. He did his doctoral work also looking at our own program, but he focused on transformative learning and I focused on power and authority. So all of the, Paulo Freire and a lot of things that people have been talking about were close to our heart. So thinking about that in the context of how do you build those understandings not only into the content of what we wanted to teach and experience with our students, but then now how do you do that online? And I think for us, one of the things was a realization that it's not, we could do all of the things that everyone was talking about in the classroom and do some version or things that are unique that you can only do online. But especially for us, we had the double challenge, which I think was wonderful and has helped to drive, I think, the quality of the courses and the classes, is that the entire institution was expected to, rightly so, to model the approaches that we're teaching in courses. So not only in how professors interact with students, but how students experience, say, student services, how they experience our policies. Do our policies reflect the best thinking in restorative practices? Is that a consistent experience from the moment you pick up the phone and talk to someone through learning, through graduation, and then afterwards, as an alumni? And that's not something that's ever done. You have to keep focusing on those things going forward. But the hope was, I mean, as a real, with using a transformative learning model, the hope was all of that experience, including the ability to get together in person at various times through conferences and other events, that the whole experience itself with the entire institution is the learning. The degree and the courses are probably the central component and the thing that people focus on, particularly in the beginning. But I found even in my own research, and Craig found in his research, toward the end of the experience, it's the sum total of the relational experience with the entire institution that at the end of the day is the chance to go beyond what any one professor can teach in a course. The challenges in doing that is, probably, in part because we have the convenience of our size and that this is, we are a single discipline school. That has to be consistent amongst the faculty and all of the staff, not just the professors. So we spend a lot of time, and our faculty are dispersed to some extent around the world. We spend probably as much or more time doing intercultural development within our own institution as we do teaching students. Because without that, I think, maybe it was Jennifer or someone else who said earlier, this isn't something you can teach for very long and not actually practice the processes that you're trying to educate people about. And that doesn't mean an expectation of utopia or doing it perfectly, but that you're open to, and there are obvious ways to co-learn with one another. And our students have been one of the things that have driven the development of the program as much as any of the work of our faculty individually. So I think trying to create an entire institution that operates on those principles and then doing the hard work, which is an everyday thing of trying to get better at it. So I think that creates a sum total learning experience that at the end of the day will be greater than the sum of its parts. The nice thing about, of course, now, I mean, with online learning through the COVID-19 crisis, I mean, we've had the ability, the graduate students haven't experienced any disruption. So that's been, a nice advantage for us. We've done things like hold listening circles with students and alumni. We've had the ability to try, and I think as many of you probably have, to do things online that maybe 2 months ago, there would have been people who said, no, that can't possibly, or maybe it shouldn't be done using online technology, but we're finding you can. It is different. There's some qualities you simply can't replicate about being in the same room. But I think it's going to drive a lot of innovation. This whole period will drive a lot of innovation going forward, and not just what we teach, but how we teach it.
Thank you very much, John. And just to note, that I've received there the document from Dorothy, and I will share that with everyone afterwards as well. And then I'd like, just before we go to the closing circle, I'd like to come to David Wexler, who we're lucky to have with us today, is one of the key thinkers you may know in the field of therapeutic jurisprudence. And he and I have been, talking around how we might collaborate between our fields a little bit. And I just wanted to float, that we've been talking about teaching restorative justice restoratively. But David, I wonder if you've reflected on how one might teach therapeutic jurisprudence therapeutically. And if so, what does that look like? You're just on mute there. Sorry, David. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. I actually have more to say than I think anyone may want to hear. And I put something in chat with my email address and the address of the website of the International Society for Therapeutic Jurisprudence. If I have some time, I actually wrote out something on teaching TJ, therapeutic jurisprudence therapeutically, how it came about, and then how it links. And I also saw amazing links with many who spoke today, Janine, Tinica, Danielle, Stephanie, several. And if I have a chance, I would actually like to mention that. I don't know how much time you're going to give me. But,
please, maybe 3-4 minutes. Would that be okay, or a little over?
Not at all. But I'll try and rush it. Okay. So you asked originally, TJ education, is it therapeutic? And I said yes. And why? First of all, legal education is no longer the paper chase, if anyone remembers what that movie was about a long time ago. I got out of law school 50 some odd years ago. I won't even mention that. And that was a rather familiar method. But 20 years ago, Susan Dykhoff, who some of you may know, wrote an essay called The Role of Therapeutic Jurisprudence in the Comprehensive Law Movement. This is something that sometimes is called non-adversarial justice, especially in Australia. But she mentioned that she's noticed in the law a number of different things in the legal profession. And what they have in common is they're more humane, therapeutic, beneficial, humanistic, healing, restorative, curative, collaborative, and comprehensive. She saw these as vectors in the comprehensive law movement, and these would have included TJ and preventive law, restorative justice, different types of mediation, collaborative divorce, problem-solving courts. She urged these vectors to interact, and TJ has done a lot of that with problem-solving courts, with preventive law, leading to a type of law counseling, with zealous counseling, collaborative divorce, and more now with RJ, as Ian has mentioned. We've had a lot of back and forth. TJ is moving to mainstream TJ, and RJ has some stuff about mainstreaming RJ. And when people talk about restorative practices, short of like a full-blown restorative justice or for restorative practices, my guess is they are perhaps what we say are therapeutic practices. But I'd like more discussion about that. What's the difference of all of this? Susan wrote 20 years ago, not 50 years ago. And what is different about all of that, I see, in those 2 decades, is women in law schools went from 10% to over 50%. And I think much of this change has to do with women and the language that she used, therapeutic, restorative, humanistic, and all of that, is very much what Deborah Tannen, a sociolinguist, talked about, a move away from a male adversarial talk with war metaphors and sports metaphors to a language more reflective of women's speech and interests, such as empathy, relationship building, well-being, psychological sensitivity. And I just went back and, the general consensus is 2/3 of TJ classes are women. In my own classes, I just looked at it now, 6 women and 3 men in one, 11 women and 4 men in the other. And that has brought so many of those values right into the teaching. I start my TJ class with
a discussion of the comprehensive law movement and our relationship to all of these others, including RJ, and how we might relate that. I don't have exams. My grading is through papers. Classes start with a rounds, with students giving their impressions of the assigned reading. Every student starts out with that, followed by a discussion that I try and facilitate of the whole class. So it sounds like some of the pedagogy is also very very similar. I think the TJ I think TJ is more of a method of thinking than it is just a packet of materials. I think if you get the conceptual structure, the conceptual idea of the conceptual framework of TJ, then it can stick with you, and you can end up really using that in other courses and so on. So recently, I saw that, I think it was Tenica was suggesting that she snuck RJ into the criminology. Well, we have a method now of trying to sneak TJ into any kind of law class, certainly any kind of RJ class, especially I think if it's in a law school. RJ seems to me to be incomplete in a law school. I don't know if RJ is incomplete, but I think a student in a law school with an RJ Institute is incomplete without some introduction to TJ, and so we have a short essay on how with a couple of videos and a couple of articles, you can get the TJ framework, and you can take that into other TJ classes, into legal clinics, into RJ classes, and so forth. And it struck me when I heard all of you speak, I saw that with criminology, for example, I've written with Tally Gal, who's in both TJ and in RJ, about positive criminology and TJ and what they could give to each other. So I think it has a lot to offer to criminology. I know that Janine and Stephanie have talked about classes or full-blown institutes of RJ, now at the University of Vermont, for example. I think there would certainly be a place for that introduction to TJ in that kind of environment. Silvina spoke about Argentina. TJ is very international. In addition to the International Society for Therapeutic Jurisprudence, we have a Spanish-speaking Asociación Iberoamericana de TJ, or Justicia Terapéutica. And there's a big chapter in Argentina with Maria Silvia Oamburu. She's in south of Buenos Aires, but within the province of Buenos Aires, in La Plata, I believe. And there's a big TJ section of the Asociación Iberoamericana. And so there's lots of activity in TJ going on in Argentina, including in the legal profession. A judge in San Juan, Argentina, Roberto Paez, is very, very involved with this. I know that there's some in Brazil. So Danielle Achetti was talking about that, and in the South, and at a university I can't remember, but it has like a German name to it. A good colleague of mine and friend, Danielle Pulcario Fensterseifer, teaches there and teaches therapeutic jurisprudence there at TJ. I know in Brazil there's been confusion because a lot of people equate TJ and drug courts only. So he uses therapeutic jurisprudence in English to differentiate that we are much broader. We relate to drug courts, but it's much, much broader than that. And we have work in legal clinics, and maybe I did that in the amount of time you wanted me to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, David. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. We'll just finish with the closing circle now. And what I'd like to ask is that those of you who've already spoken, maybe try and take just about 30 seconds. I'm conscious that some people haven't had an opportunity to speak yet, and so you'd be very welcome to take a bit longer and offer your broader reflections on the session overall. But the question I'd like to ask for the closing circle is, if each of you might want to suggest one thing that you took from today, and or a piece of advice for someone developing a restorative justice curriculum for the first time. So either one thing you took from today or a piece of advice for someone developing a restorative justice curriculum for the first time. So I will go first on that. And I think this idea of what does a restorative assessment look like is a really good one, because it's one thing, you know, it's something that I just kind of have taken for granted up until, frankly, someone emailed me about it in relation to this call. But, you know, it's something that it's probably the thing that's most, or not most important to people, but it's hugely important in everyone's life in the academic setting. And yet it's something that I had hardly really reflected on at all, apart from, you know, how to make it as painless as possible within the context of the existing framework. So that's something I'd like to reflect on a lot more. And if it's okay, I'm just going to go around the screen where you guys are on my screen. Like, it's probably different on others and people keep jumping around, but I'll just call out your name and give you some time to respond. So Mara Schiff.
I think what I'm left in this call with is that teaching restorative justice or restorative practices, however you want to call it, is never in a vacuum. It's always inside a context, and it can never be divorced. The experience of teaching an individual course can never be divorced from the context in which that course is taught. And so I'm reflecting on how I feel, how I haven't thought that through as much, and am aware that each of us takes with us the experience of our university, of our role in that university, the power in that university, our own privilege. It infuses the course, but the course is not isolated from those things. And that's where I think the struggle in how to do this well is.
Thank you.
In 30 seconds at least.
And just to say also, I forgot to say, if you haven't spoken yet, please also still introduce yourself and your institution.
Oh, by the way, sorry, I never said I'm Mara Schiff. I'm a professor at Florida Atlantic University and vice president of the National Association for Community Restorative Justice. Sorry, I never said that.
Thanks, Mara. And Mikhail?
I'm really just sitting and soaking in the companionship that I've been feeling and that I hope to continue to benefit from. I don't think, even though this university has over 40,000 students and many programs, I don't think there's another restorative justice class at the university other than the ones that I teach. So some of you, of course, I've known for a little while, but I'm just really delighted to meet new colleagues and connect with you and hear some of your ideas, and looking forward to diving into some of the resources you sent. So thank you all.
Shannon?
Like others, I'm just very grateful for this experience. I have a lot of ideas and things I want to process related to assessment, and I'm hoping that many of you would.
Oh, we've just lost you there for a second, Shannon. Sorry. Can you hear us? Maybe I'll come back to Shannon in a second. And I'll just go to Ted Lewis.
Hi, everybody. I'm from Duluth, Minnesota, and I work at the Center for Restorative Justice and Peacemaking, which was founded by Dr. Mark Umbright. And occasionally I teach an adjunct course at the university. And this semester I'm teaching a college course at Bethel University. I think one thing I've noticed in the conversation is the circle model is pretty dominant in the experiential learning. I come from a restorative conference trainer background, and so a lot of the experiential learning that I do in the college context is helping students to actually take on roles of harming and harmed parties and support people. And we do a lot of conference role playing based on actual cases that I've done. And I really find that that helps students really enter into the heart zone. If there's one bit of advice I'd pass on today is if you're teaching restoratively, you're teaching from the heart and to the heart as much as you are working with head knowledge. And in my experience, conferencing gets to heart conversation in very profound, powerful ways, which I know circling can too, but given my own experience in conferencing, that's what I aim for.
Gabrielle Fava.
Yes. Hi everyone. I am Gabriel Fava. I am professor of law of criminal law in Buenos Aires. I work with Silvina Alonso in Department of Criminal Law. I study restorative justice in different forms. I think that the university is a good space for apply and train restorative justice, different kind. In my university, that the students in the career have information in restorative justice. Only in the postgrad, the students can find restorative justice. Then this situation is very bad because it's very important that young students can access at the restorative justice. I believe it, and I am convinced that the younger we are trying it in restorative justice, we can apply that to our daily practices. For example, in our penal code, time ago, it wasn't, weren't contemplate the restorative justice. Now, since 2015, are applying the mediation and the integral repair of the damage. That is law of conflict that enter the penal system and solve it through the mediation or reparation. However, the lawyers are not trained in this practice. Only in litigation is your formation, but it's important work for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Thank you all so much for, I've been just taking a ton of notes and loving this conversation. I'm taking away from this definitely just a challenge to continue to consider how to subvert power dynamics in the classroom and, going beyond approaching the role as facilitator and, even giving away that facilitation power, but also, what is the classroom content was mentioned as something that could be brought to the group. This different models of evaluation and some of the specific ideas that have been shared in the chat have been really helpful as well. So thank you all. I would really love to continue to have this conversation beyond the circle today. It's been really helpful and inspiring.
John Bailey?
Yeah, I think one of the main things I'll take away, I mean, as we all know, I mean, in the background of this whole conversation is the pandemic. I think, all of us in our own institutions are finding, it will expose strengths and weaknesses. I said to a leader early in the crisis, well, we'll find out exactly how good we are at some of the relational things we've been practicing over the last couple of years, as the crisis plays out. I think the global opportunity for restorative pedagogues in higher education is, I mean, the reality is large disruption is probably only just beginning in higher education. And during a time like this, and I think it's one of the reasons why I know and I'm sure many of you have kept with the work, is that we believe that not only what we teach, but how we teach it. And as we think about how that should be influencing institutions, should be the future, not just of our institutions, but for higher ed in general. That, as an impact, a long-term impact of what we teach and who we teach, that we change the institutions themselves. And I think that opportunity, there is a window of opportunity there for more rapid change now than there was 8 months ago or 6 weeks ago. So I'm looking forward to the challenge of that. And I think, everyone here, obviously everything that everyone shared is some piece of what I hope is the future higher education and our field. So thank you.
Silvina?
Thank you everyone for this meeting. I think that this place is wonderful because I can see the different situations of the different university, and I can confirm that our school in law must to try and a hard work for the include and formal education in restorative justice. We work a lot in different activities, but we must to work more hard for change the formal educations for the future professional of law. Thank you.
Thanks, and I'll just come back to Shannon there, who has rejoined us.
Sorry, y'all, internet. Yeah, I think I was just saying, I hope many of you will share your syllabi and assessment activities. I would love for that to be a thing to just continue the ways that I'm thinking about assessment in these classes. But in general, I'm just left with a sense of like reflecting on all of the challenges that we've brought up today, that there's also a sense that like we can trust the power of this really beautiful process that we have to be able to engage meaningfully with these challenges about how we like deal with power, how we deal with hierarchical structures, that the process is corruptible if we're not attentive to it, but that it can contain the ability for us to work meaningfully in these spaces. So I'm really excited and encouraged by hearing you all talk about that.
Kevin?
I took away two things. One is just the power of community. It was great to see some familiar faces and have conversations again that we continue to have year after year, which are hopeful. The other for me, of course, as many institutions are experiencing, our plan going forward for our university is to be online, at least for the fall term, if not the winter term as well, is I'm much more comfortable in person creating a restorative community and just thinking about how we do that online. So this was helpful just to even think about this as a community and what it means to be restorative in this kind of environment. So thank you.
Tinica?
Very much to the same note, actually. Thank you so much for having me on this group. I've enjoyed meeting some of you again and some of you for the first time. And I'm just kind of processing all the things I'm going to have to read once my grading is done for this semester, and just learning more on how to do this better and how restorative justice transcends our classroom on restorative justice teaching, and how it should inform and continue to inform all our interactions with our students on campus with regards to any kind of misconduct that may happen, any kind of Title IX context as well. Interactions with our faculty, colleagues, and all that. And I am a little nervous on how I'm going to be teaching my restorative justice class online next semester. Sad that I won't be able to take my students to the prison that we usually visit, so I'm going to have to find some alternatives. And I really appreciate all your suggestions, because I'm sure I'm going to be fine with all the suggestions that have been made so far. Thank you so much.
David Wexler?
Well, I certainly enjoyed this session, and it opened up an awful lot of material for me to think about. I like very much some of the stuff on methodology. Someone who mentioned that sometimes people are more comfortable maybe speaking about some difficult subjects online rather than face to face. So that was an interesting comment that I think it was Tinica made or someone made that I found very interesting. But I saw so much of the values that are promoted in restorative justice and how similar they are to that of therapeutic jurisprudence. And I'm anxious to see if we can have more of a not only a dialogue, but a bit of borrowing from the two. I do think that there's a whole therapeutic approach to the law that TJ is proposing and active in and making some strides in. And originally, I think anything that had to do with the law, our impression was something that RJ wanted no part of. And maybe in a pure form that may be so, but I think that people are starting to see that there are some situations and all that perhaps can't avoid some kind of legal connection. I know that there are judges, obviously, you all know that defer imposition of sentence in favor of a restorative justice conference, and I think that's a terrific approach. But there are also now movements within the legal field itself to bring a very good kind of therapeutic judge together. There are criminal settlement conferences now where there are offenders and victims and families of both, and discussion, very, very sensitive and appropriate discussion. There's room for apology there because nothing said in such conference can be used later on in court if matters break down. And so there are just lots of, and there are things sometimes where perhaps victims can't be involved, but it's a very, very, I have a very short piece on expungement and the rituals of RJ really that can be brought in to an expungement proceeding. Where the judge says something and the lawyers say something and a hearing is held and family members are there to kind of reintegrate the person into the community. So that may not be technically RJ because it's law for one, and two, it doesn't have victim involvement, but it seems nonetheless that people who are familiar with RJ and with its goals and all ought to be supportive of something like that, ought to be familiar with it. And surely in law schools, at least, where people are learning RJ, one would hope that students would also be exposed to TJ and be able to develop it. So anyway, I've really thoroughly enjoyed this. And as I said, I don't even know what happened to my thing in chat, but I think it went up there where I gave my own email address and a website of the International Society on Therapeutic Jurisprudence, and mentioned that I'd like very much to be in touch with people who have any interest in this. So thank you.
Dorothy?
I was sleeping almost there, no. One thing I'm taking from today, I don't feel alone. And that's amazing. And then just a piece of advice, something that has radically changed my life and understanding of restorative justice is building relationships with Indigenous peoples. And so I would really, really highly recommend that. And I know many of you do, but I think they need to lead. I think Indigenous peoples need to lead us to a deeper understanding of restorative justice as a way of being. Thank you.
David Karp?
Hello, everyone. I guess I'm closing out, ruminating on, I think one of the great tragedies of the civil rights era was integrating children into schools without integrating teachers, and that we have some of the same challenges ahead, that we have a focus on bringing restorative justice to students, but not necessarily to our colleagues or the structures of the universities that we work within. So we'll bump up against the limits pretty quickly. unless we attend to that as well. But it's good to see everybody, and thanks for organizing this, Ian.
Laura Hine.
Yes, good evening, or well, it's evening here in Brussels. My name is Laura Hine. I'm working as policy officer at the European Forum for Restorative Justice. Thank you very much for organizing this roundtable, very stimulating and inspiring, and thank to all of you for your very interesting sharing and contribution and sharing your experiences. So the forum is not actively involved in teaching activities, at least not at the university level, but one of the core activities of the forum, as most of you know, is organizing trainings. And actually at the moment we are developing a very specific training curriculum and on different topics, and it was almost very, very interesting to hear about your suggestion on methodology and how to teach in a restorative way. Very interesting, the creative tools you are using, the challenges you are facing, and this it's very interesting for us that actually so the methodology and how to teach and how to train restoratively is very interesting. I was also very interesting to hear that some of you are engaged in training the judiciary, since we are starting now a new project in training the judiciary in different, I think 4 different countries in Europe, mostly judges and lawyers, and it will be a combination between face-to-face training and online training. So we are at the beginning of this project, but we are very happy to hear more about what you are doing in this field. For example, from Daniel Schutti, it was very interesting to hear that you in Brazil, you're also involved in such kind of trainings. I would also say that we highly welcome the training models developed by the UNODC. I have to say that I was impressed by the richness and diversity of material that you can find in these models, and I think it's a very, very huge and interesting contribution for the field. Last thing I wanted to share with you is that we are very often approached by students, but also by professionals that want from us information about transitional restorative justice courses and academic courses. And so in our website, we provide a database, a list of courses on restorative justice. I suppose that most of your courses are already there, but if you want us also if you want to have also your course on the list, please let us know. I can send you the link now on the chat, but Ian, I think also Edith should have sent it to you, but I send it now. So thanks you again very much for this very inspiring debate.
Thank you, Laura. And Rowan?
Hello, sorry, I wasn't turning my microphone on. Hi, I'm Rowan. I'm doing a PhD at York St John University, looking at how restorative justice is taught in criminology programs in England and Wales. So Ian kindly invited me to attend all 3 of the roundtables, and this one's been extremely interesting. So just quickly, what I've taken away from it, obviously a lot in relation to my research, but just as a teacher as well, how to create classrooms and have a sense of community and kind of innovative ways for students to learn. And also I really found the discussion about the challenges of hierarchy and power structures really, really interesting. And thank you all very much for letting me listen in.
Rick?
So I think my thoughts would go back to one of the first questions you asked, Ian, which is, can restorative practices be taught outside of the conventional fields? I think we see a bit of that right here in the group that's here, but I would say that we need to go way beyond that. I would look at teaching it in early childhood development. if we're looking at providing sort of the primary scaffolding for child development, what better place to begin than in early childhood development? It also would anchor it in the community as well with parents and families. It should be in nursing because that's a primary care endeavor, in human resources and management. And I think the reasons for doing that is that all of those involve, obviously, everything we do involves relational engagement. But also, I think the other thing is that it allows for the voices of those that typically are not heard to come into the circle. And then that begins to start to address some of the power issues. It's not the end all be all, because I think we have to go back to the communities and build from there. So I would say that as institutions, we need to have more engaged campuses that actually are embedded in the communities and our participants, not something that exists as silos and separate from their lived realities.
Jennifer?
Well, maybe the last two comments feed right into what I was struck by, and I'm leaving thinking about. I was struck by the unspoken thing, which was we all entered into this conversation really not simply taking it as how do you educate people in the form of sort of training them to do particular practices, but really thinking about the more expansive need to be equipping people in terms of how they think about the work, how they think about the world, how they come to be able to examine and analyze how they're situated, how we encounter justice, how we think about relationships as really core to informing then what people do and how they act and practice in the world. And so I think there's a real urgent need for more of this kind of conversation about how do we move beyond talking about, I don't just mean at a language level, but talking about training and sets of, equipping people with skills absent or divorced from this building of understanding, which really thinking about it pedagogically and in an educational setting breathes, sort of bigger life into this. What do we need to be educating for justice? And I think that idea of doing that in less siloed ways and in more integrative ways. I'm just really struck, just have finished 4 years being a commissioner on this, the first in Canada public inquiry to work restoratively that's spent a lot of time in its report and in its thinking about how we need to be breaking down silos and working in less fragmented ways to make this very kind of relational shift in structures and powers and systems in the way that we've been talking about here that's essential for good restorative justice education. So really struck by that and grateful for the time with all of you and for learning from all of you. Thank you.
Brenda?
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everyone. I am calling in today from the traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Squamish Nation. And they taught me a word, and it's Chinchinstawai, and it means to hold each other up. And so what I wanted to sort of acknowledge is that I always bridge my courses with Indigenous teachings and standing up to the calls to action from our Truth and Reconciliation movement, because that's the really hard work, is really addressing those systemic issues. And I wanted to acknowledge what Dorothy says, that it's hard. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna make the institution uncomfortable now with about what I'm about to say. And so sometimes you do feel very alone. So I also, what I'm getting from today, I wanted to acknowledge that we often talk in the field of restorative justice about our community of care, and you are my community of care, and I've experienced Chinchinstawai today, so thank you very much. And so I think for me, that's the bigger question, is because we all work in these institutions that really hold up the traditional sort of nation state of who is being educated here. And so, you know, pushing up against those systemic barriers at an institutional level, and that those institutions that hold up this traditional nation state, is really hard work. But for me, it's at the core of this relational work and who we are educating in these traditional structures. So thank you for being my community of care. And that's it.
Stephanie Clark. If you're with us, Stephanie. Yep, great.
Yeah, here I am. I'm going to try the video again. I was competing, I think, with bandwidth. My son also had a Zoom with school. You know, I'm thinking about sort of, I like to think in continuums, and I can't help but think about, you know, people who are coming to us, right, as interested persons to learn something or to be able to take something on. And you know, if you think about them being a student and kind of going through the whole experience and so many things that we talked about today, there's just so much complexity in terms of not just what we're trying to provide for these people that they can then grow with, but stuff that we're actually trying to do ourselves. And there's so many communities that we are creating and that we're part of. And this conversation has just given me such lift to sort of move forward in those communities and really trying to be authentic about what it is we're trying to do and how we relate with each other. Because all of these people that we're touching hopefully are going to be able to go out and make these changes that we want to see in the systems that we talk about beyond our educational systems. So I think one, very appreciative of the conversation because there's such great hope, I think, in all that we are striving to do. And the other thing that I personally will take away is this concept that it's okay to be awkward in the moment and to create the awkward space, because I think that we won't have real restorative, authentic change without being able to accept that awkwardness. And that gives.
Oh, and we've lost Stephanie just at the most profound point of what she was going to say, I'm sure. But I'll move on to Jiao now.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Ian, for inviting me, and thank you, everyone, for such insightful conversation. I sometimes use in some courses in restorative justice many of your writings and your scholarly work. So know that a lot of what I've been passing on to my students is inspired by your work. So thank you. What I take away is from this conversation is that reflection is important. Thinking and reflecting on what we are doing is important to RJ, restorative justice, but also considering our students and how much they have to teach us and how much they have to contribute to this conversation. I believe in innovation and creativity. So I think that that is something that a very important element of what I would like to bring into my classes or enhance that part of my class, that element in my class. So I look forward to reading Lindsay's book and learning more from how to incorporate a lot of what she and her co-authors are going to be sharing with us. So thank you very much. It was nice seeing some familiar faces, and I really appreciate being here with you. Thank you.
Stephanie, was there anything else you want to add? I think we've got you back now.
Yeah, I'll do this now with a microphone and no video because clearly that's not working. I'm not sure where I got cut off, but I just really have such a deep appreciation for everything that was shared today and all of just the wealth of information that was available also in the chat to follow up with. And so, yeah, thanks to everybody. Thanks especially to you, Ian, for setting this up.
Jamie?
Hi. So I won't turn on my video, but I just wanted to say I think I was the only non-professor / researcher or someone in academia. And from that perspective, I was actually very surprised at the level of complexity that restorative teaching involves. Just the fact that you have to not only teach the values and principles of restorative justice, but you have to do it restoratively, and all with very young people who are just learning all this stuff. So I can't imagine, and I would like to just say my deepest appreciation for your work, because that's what really gets the field going, and also for the wealth of documents and resources that we have seen in the chat so far. That was very useful, and also thank you very much for letting me be the discussion here, and thank you, Ian, for organizing.
And Wendy.
Thanks, Ian. And thanks to everyone. It's honestly, I think it's been an exceptional conversation. I feel very privileged, blessed to have been a part of it. Mercifully, I think a silent part of it, because I am not a restorative justice educator. And I think that that's where my reflection on this conversation comes in that as an educator, as an academic, and in the work that I'm doing at UNODC and working across, curricula that is multidisciplinary, there is so much potential, I think, in the depth of reflection that you have offered and the commitment to authenticity. And, Dorothy had mentioned before in a reflection on, what is restorative justice pedagogy, that, there's potential in restorative justice pedagogy leading us to a place where we can question the assumptions of all teaching. And that really resonates with me. I think that there's so much that I have heard that really resonates with me as a person, as an academic, as an educator. What transformative potential we would have if we could, across the higher education sector, ignite a conversation about equal voice. If we could encourage educators to reflect at every relevant moment on the power dynamic and how it is that they could subvert that in the classroom, Lindsay, as you mentioned, and their own privilege, Dorothy, you mentioned. I mean, these concepts resonate so well with me, I think, in terms of what it is that we need to do to meet students where they're at, and to see the students before us. And to have that really be that deep listening and that meaningful engagement. This, for me, is what teaching and learning is about. Drawing on Indigenous knowledge, ensuring that the voices of Indigenous people are in the room with us. This is not an appropriation of language and wisdom, but a real showcasing of the strengths that we can harness if we take this really collaborative and reflective kind of practice to heart. And I wanted to use the word heart because I felt there was so much heart in this conversation. And honestly, I find that it's rare that I'm in a space such as this. So I really want to, extend my sincere gratitude to you for your honesty in the conversation. And this is the power of your community. Kevin used that phrase, power of community. It's your community, it's not mine. So I feel very much like a kind of privileged witness to what has happened here. And I had one tiny other thing to say, which is to pick up on something that Rick had said about, pushing this further into other, well, something that Rick had said and also something that John had said. So Rick was talking about pushing it further into other spaces, early childhood development education, into communities. I completely agree, and I see so much potential for that. And John had said that, maybe the COVID crisis offers something, perhaps of a circuit breaker and an opportunity for that work to be done. So, I don't know if there's anything meaningful in what I have said, but certainly they're the reflections that I had. I take an awful lot from this and have taken extensive notes and will have this inform the work that we do. So thank you very much once again for attending, and thank you, Ian, for convening so well. Thank you.
Thanks, and I'll close the roundtable now just again by thanking Wendy, the UNODC, and the Education for Justice Initiative for providing a platform for our conversation. And if you haven't already done so, please check out the E4J website, where you can find a range of materials and resources to help you develop your criminology and criminal justice curricula. For those of you watching the recording after the fact, if you found this useful, please let us know by emailing me on ian.martyr@mu.ie, because I think we can organize a lot more activities in this area if people find it to be of value. In the meantime, please do continue to connect with each other, as this is the only way for us to maintain the strong relationships and communities that we need throughout this crisis. Thank you so much to everyone here for participating in this very, very deep and meaningful conversation today. I'm Ian Martyr from Maynooth University in Ireland, and I wish you all the best in your teaching and scholarship activities. Thank you very much, everyone.